So Harry's fellow Gryffindors were creating a sign in order to give Harry a confidence boost. That makes sense. But why does it say Potter for President? Neither the Ministry of Magic nor the Muggle UK have a president. Who would nominate someone for a completely non-existent title? Spoiler warning, this is an in-depth retrospective and story analysis of the entirety of the Harry Potter books, one chapter at a time. If this is your first video in the series, it is highly recommended that you begin watching this series from the beginning, which you can do by going to the playlist that I provide right here. Okay, now that everyone is all caught up, let's continue. The chapter opens up with a description of Hagrid clearing frost off the broomsticks. Why? Why shouldn't that task fall to Madam Hooch? Hagrid's the gamekeeper, not the Quidditch referee. Or does game include sporting equipment as well as the school's animals? Anyway, Harry's first ever Quidditch match is just around the corner, and the narrator says that if Gryffindor wins, they'll move up to second place in the house championships. This is one of the things with Hogwarts' Quidditch setup that doesn't quite make sense. In Prisoner of Azkaban, it is established that Quidditch teams have their own cup they compete for independently of the House Cup. Did Quidditch points also get added to the House points as well? If so, how can Harry be so sure that Gryffindor would move up to second place if Gryffindor won? Now, obviously, it is impossible to end the game with the winner having less than 150 points. So if they were trailing the second place house by less than 150 points, that would certainly move them up a rank. But couldn't they also score a lot of quaffle goals and catch the snitch in order to move up to first place? For that matter, why add Quidditch points to the house score anyway? That just makes no sense. Well, Hermione is now a little more lax about breaking rules, so she helps her new friends cope with the cold weather by having some magical fire in a jar to keep them warm. When Snape comes snooping, they try to hide the jar. Why? The narrator says the fire in a jar wouldn't be allowed, but why wouldn't it be allowed? It's clearly under control. It's not being used for any wrongful purpose. So why would it not be allowed? Well, it turns out the school's rules don't mean diddly squat anyway, because when Snape comes looking for an excuse to punish them, he makes up a rule that library books aren't supposed to be taken outside of the castle. While the Golden Trio are afraid the fire in a jar is against the rules, they are certain that this rule about library books is not, instead insisting that Snape just made that rule up. This obviously causes severe problems with how Hogwarts is run. I mean, if teachers can just make up rules at the drop of a hat and punish students for breaking those non-existent rules, why doesn't Snape do that all the time? We'll see time and time again that one of Snape's most consistent character traits is his tendency to monitor Harry like a vulture and look for any excuse he can to put Harry in detention or dock huge amounts of points from Gryffindor. But here, he doesn't even need an excuse. If he doesn't have a legitimate excuse, he can simply make up an illegitimate one. So why doesn't he do that all the time? Now granted, it is never confirmed that teachers can indeed just make rules up to punish students for no reason. We only hear the Golden Trio discuss it amongst themselves. So it could just be their interpretation of Snape's behavior rather than actual sacrosanct lore. However, there is also nothing at any point in the series that actually contradicts the Golden Trio's assertion that Snape just made this rule up on the spot. And considering that this is consistent with how the house point system works overall, allowing teachers to add or subtract astronomical amounts of points at the slightest whim, I am going to assume, in the absence of any overriding proof, that the Golden Trio are correct in their assumption that Snape did indeed make this rule up on the spot. So Snape confiscates Harry's book, Quidditch Through the Ages. Harry decides to try and ask Snape to have it back, and hopefully do so in front of other teachers, so Snape will be shamed into complying. He heads to the staff room and sees Snape treating his leg, complaining that the dog that bit him had 3 heads. Harry immediately puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that Snape must have been in the Forbidden Corridor. However, I honestly have a problem with how this discovery is handled. Why is Snape treating his injury in the staff room with Filch's help, instead of in the hospital wing with Madame Pomfrey's help? I mean, sure, it wouldn't make sense for Harry to check the hospital wing. Overhearing this dialogue is important to the story because it further establishes Snape as a red herring villain. So obviously, it was important to the plot that Harry walk in on Snape as he was complaining about the 3 heads, which means he needed to walk in on Snape as he was treating his leg injury. However, that didn't require Snape to be in the staff room. Yes, it makes sense that Harry would check the staff room, but this contrivance could have very easily been worked around. Imagine if Harry knocked on the staff room, only to find Snape wasn't there. Instead, some other teacher was there. Maybe McGonagall, maybe Flitwick, or Sprout. The exact teacher isn't important. Harry tells that teacher that he's looking for Professor Snape, and they tell Harry that he's in the hospital wing. So, Harry goes to the hospital wing, and that's when Harry overhears Snape talking about the 3 heads. Boom! Plot holes resolved. Alas, what we got instead was Snape treating his leg injury in the most unlikely of places, and that's just lame. So anyway, Harry heads back to his dormitory and tells Ron and Hermione what he overheard. Since this is the first time Hermione has been one of the good guys, this is the first time we've organically had the chance to see her defend a teacher. This sets up Hermione's character arc for this chapter. Then we move on to the Quidditch game itself, and this is honestly one of the weirdest games in the entire franchise. In the previous chapter, we learned the rules of Quidditch, and those rules stay consistent throughout the entire series, for better or worse. But the actual minute-to-minute gameplay and strategy is something that J.K. Rowling is still experimenting with, figuring out how she wants the game to work. Because of this, we get some behavior in this game that we never see in any other game, and which honestly makes no sense in universe. For example, it's the commentator, not either of the Seekers, who first spots the snitch, and when Harry and the Slytherin Seeker are chasing after it, all the other players immediately stop what they are doing to watch the snitch chase. That never happens in any other game in the entire series, nor does it make any sense that it happens here, seeing as snitch sightings should be a regular occurrence in Quidditch games. The only reason it happens here is because J.K. Rowling hasn't yet decided on the ebb and flow of a normal Quidditch game. Then there's the fact that Slytherin Captain Marcus Flint blocks Harry to keep him from catching the snitch, and that foul only results in a penalty shot for Gryffindor. Just like Snape making up non-existent rules, if they can do this, why don't they do that all the time? Sure, Gryffindor may get a penalty shot, they can have 100 penalty shots for all I care. If Harry never catches the snitch, you can't lose. In basketball, the equivalent type of foul would be called goaltending. And from what I understand about this sport, which is admittedly not very much as I'm not a fan of sports, the penalty for goaltending is that the opposing team automatically gets however many points the shot would otherwise have been worth, regardless of whether the ball actually goes into the net. Apply that to Quidditch, and that would have meant that Gryffindor would have been automatically credited with a snitch capture, giving Gryffindor 150 points and ending the game. Meanwhile, even in-universe, Dean Thomas suggests that the red card system from soccer, or football as it's known everywhere else except the USA, in order to remove Flint from play, forcing Slytherin to play the rest of the game with only 2 chasers. Either of these penalties would have been a sufficient deterrent to keep Quidditch players from pulling shit like this, but no, we just get a single penalty shot. And that's just dumb. Now, because this is so early in the series and Rowling is still getting into her groove and figuring out how she wants the series to work, this is one of the few times the narrator switches the POV character mid-chapter, when it starts following the conversations of the first-year Gryffindors in the stands. Although, unlike the aforementioned example of the game coming to a stop for no reason while the snitch is in sight, this will be repeated in the next Quidditch game. My guess is that Rowling did this in order to divvy up the content of the chapter, so the readers don't become bored reading about Lee Jordan making the same observations over and over again. Later in the series, Rowling will have developed her writing talents enough that she can give us a nice diversity of narration while still keeping Harry as the exclusive POV character. Suddenly, Harry's broom starts trying to buck him off. Hagrid points out that this should be impossible, stating that only powerful dark magic can interfere with a broomstick. Remember in Chapter 7 of this series when I said there was plenty of world building in this series that only existed to serve a narrative function despite making no in-universe sense whatsoever? Well, this is such an instance. The purpose of this exposition is to warn the audience that something truly sinister is at play here. That Harry's broom isn't simply malfunctioning, but that somebody is trying to kill him. The exposition certainly serves that purpose just fine, but it comes at the expense of any in-universe logic. Why would broomsticks, of all things, get such powerful protection when so many other things could benefit so much more from having such strong protection? Why not enchant wands so that only powerful dark magic can interfere with them? Why not enchant wizards' robes to have this protection, thus creating some powerful body armor for wizards? Maybe it's because I'm just not a sports fan myself, so maybe I don't quite understand just how passionate sports fans can be about their, well, passion. But it honestly just seems petty to me that a piece of sporting equipment gets this special treatment when so many other things far more deserving of this kind of protection don't. Anyway, while Harry's broom is bucking, we get a few more things that don't happen in other Quidditch games, like Marcus Flint taking the quaffle and scoring 5 goals in a row. It's weird that he is able to do this for 2 reasons. First, the narrator says that no one notices him scoring these goals because everyone is focused on Harry's broom being out of control. So how would Slytherin be credited with any goals if nobody was paying attention to him doing it? Second, as soon as he scores, shouldn't Gryffindor automatically be entitled to take initial control of the quaffle for the next play? Sure, Slytherin can steal the quaffle and score multiple times in a row that way, but Gryffindor has to be the one to start the next play. So how is Flint able to do this? Hermione determines that Snape is jinxing the broom, and so she runs to the other side of the Quidditch stands to try and obscure Snape. We hear later in this chapter from Hermione that the curse being applied requires constant eye contact, so Hermione's goal is to force Snape to break eye contact by setting fire to Snape's robes. Now, as I mentioned in the 5-minute introduction video for this series, this retrospective series is being done on the assumption that my viewers already know the story for all 7 books. So it should come as no surprise to my target audience that Snape isn't the one cursing the broom, but rather trying to apply a counter-curse. Instead, it's Professor Quirrell who's applying the actual curse. As Hermione is rushing to cast the fire spell, she inadvertently knocks Quirrell over, breaking his eye contact that way. However, the narrator says that it was at least 30 seconds between that happening and Snape breaking his eye contact. Despite this, it is Snape's broken eye contact, not Quirrell's, which enables Harry to regain control of his broomstick. Oops! Looks like J.K. Rowling made a boo-boo! As soon as Harry regains control of his broom, he immediately dives downward and catches the snitch in his mouth. This will become a plot point way down the line in Deathly Hallows, but for the time being, Harry's sudden and abrupt catching of the snitch is used to justify why the Slytherins don't stop him from catching the snitch a second time, as well as why Quirrell doesn't simply apply his broom bucking curse again. For some reason, Lee Jordan is bellowing the final score, 170 points to 60, some 20 minutes after the game ends. Earlier in this video, I speculated that reading about Lee Jordan making the same observations in commentary over and over again would likely have bored the readers, but I'd imagine this would have bored the people in universe. After the game, the Golden Trio have tea with Hagrid. Hermione no longer trusts Snape because she is convinced that Snape is out to kill Harry. But Hagrid is doggedly defending Snape. Because Snape is a Hogwarts teacher, Hagrid considers that to be irrefutable proof that Snape didn't do it. Then again, we later find out that it was Quirrell who cast the curse, and he's a Hogwarts teacher too. So clearly being a Hogwarts teacher doesn't automatically mean he didn't do it. Now, a few chapters ago, I mentioned how McGonagall is a total bitch, even though a lot of the stuff she does was standard teacher behavior. It was Snape who Rowling intentionally wrote as being unfair and unnecessarily hostile towards Harry, whereas McGonagall was simply behaving like a standard strict teacher. However, I still called McGonagall a bitch because, while her behavior in that chapter might have been on par with how many teachers behave, it was nonetheless harmful to Harry while allowing Malfoy to get away with his bullying scot-free. Well, here, Hagrid is engaging in another type of behavior that is common among school faculty and staff, but is nonetheless prejudicial to the expedient administration of justice. The fact that no school employee will speak out against another school employee regardless of the evidence. This could be considered analogous to the blue wall of silence that currently infects most American police departments like a disease, and we will later learn in Prisoner of Azkaban that even McGonagall follows this principle in regards to her fellow teachers, because of course she does. So anyway, to add more evidence to their case against Snape, Harry brings up the fact that he overheard Snape talking about the three-headed dog and getting bitten by him. Hagrid immediately calls the dog Fluffy, so I can now start using that name in the series myself. Hagrid tells the Golden Trio to forget what the dog is guarding, saying it's between Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel. By name-dropping Nicholas Flamel, the chapter ends with Hagrid inadvertently giving the Golden Trio a keyword that they can use to focus their research to find out what Fluffy is guarding, much to Hagrid's chagrin. As far as story advancement is concerned, the two primary contributions this chapter makes to the main plot are name-dropping Nicholas Flamel and establishing Snape, not just as a mean teacher, but as the red herring main villain of this book. Hagrid dropping Flamel's name is handled nice and organically. After all, we could reasonably assume that Hagrid thought the Golden Trio already knew about Flamel, just not about the Sorcerer's Stone. And yes, I said Sorcerer's Stone, not Philosopher's Stone, and I'll explain why I've decided to call it that when I get to chapter 13 of this book, which is when the actual stone itself gets named. However, the establishment of Snape as a red herring villain is handled far less organically. As I said, it makes no sense for him to be in the staff room to treat his injuries. He's only there so Harry can overhear him complaining about Fluffy, and so he had to be in the staff room because that's where Harry would naturally think to look. But as I said earlier, this could have been handled a lot more organically. When Harry's broom starts bucking, there's a totally pointless exposition about how only powerful dark magic can interfere with a broom, which only really exists to give Hermione the idea to check the teachers while completely disregarding the in-universe logic. Also, the fact that Harry regains control of his broom a full 30 seconds after Quirrell's eye contact is broken, but immediately after Snape's eye contact is broken, only sets up for a plot hole later down the line when Snape is revealed to only be a red herring. After that, Hagrid's refusal to believe Snape feels tragically organic, but only because it reminds me of a very tragic part of real life that honestly does not deserve to be a part of real life. Now, Hermione is the big one here for character development. She starts out insisting that Snape is one of the good guys, but she quickly realizes that she can't argue with what's right in front of her. When she sees Snape engaging in exactly the kind of behavior she read about which causes a broom bucking curse, She can no longer deny the irrefutable evidence, although Hagrid certainly finds a way to do so. Ron, however, is almost entirely incidental in this chapter. He says a few things, but he ultimately does fuck all. Now that Hermione has joined the group, you should all get comfortable with Ron in this role, because it's not going to change anytime soon. He does maybe one or two things for the entire rest of the series, and that's about it. Harry gets a quick moment to act nice and brave when he decides to stand up to Professor Snape and ask for his book back. While he ultimately runs away, it's not simply because he's scared of Snape, but because he's discovered some hella incriminating evidence against him. So it feels far less cowardly than if he were to run simply because Snape is angry. Well, ladies and gentlemen, next time it's Christmas, and Harry gets a Christmas present that becomes one of his most prized possessions that will come in handy on multiple occasions for the entire rest of the series. I'm talking, of course, about his sweater from Molly Weasley. So tune in next time when I do a retrospective and analysis of Chapter 12, The Mirror of Erised. In the meantime, however, I am Acer Thorn, and I will see you guys later.